My name is Ryan Romberg. I'm the pastor of Placentia Presbyterian Church, and this is Three for the Road. The passage for this Sunday was from Romans chapter 13, verses 8 through 14. The sermon title was New Rule. If you haven't seen that yet, go ahead and check that out, and this video will make a whole lot more sense. Okay, first, what did we leave out from the sermon that we could have explored even further, but we didn't have enough time? A ton. Once again, these passages are just gold mines. There are so many things that we can explore. One of the biggest is the argument of Romans. And I've mentioned the word argument. Sometimes that sounds negative. I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean that in someone laying out an argument to try to help you understand something differently, to convince you of something. And that's what Romans does. It is one large argument that takes you somewhere. Now, the big thing about Romans and all of arguments in the Bible, particularly Paul, who does a lot of this, he lays out these arguments, brings you to a certain point, and then encourages you to do something. You might feel that Paul has an agenda, right? So his agenda is the end, and then he makes up this thing to get you to the end. And that's just not it. With biblical arguments, they're rooted and based strongly in something that they're convicted of. You can call it a theological proposition. I don't know if that's how Paul would have put it, theological, but he would have put it in terms of what he has experienced, what he's seen, what he's witnessed, what has been part of his community of faith. And then when Jesus comes, how that really was a seismic shift in his understanding of the world as he knew it. And that is laid out pretty strongly in Romans. One of the essential parts of Paul's argument in Romans, and we mentioned this a little bit, if you read Romans, and I recommend you do, I really encourage you to pay attention to the parts of Romans that may not make a whole lot of sense, or parts that you might not want to maybe preach on a Sunday, right? Why? Why would you do that? Those are the parts that probably make the biggest difference for you to understand what Paul is really saying. And the one piece that I'm hinting at once you read through is how Paul is talking about circumcision, right? He's talking about works of the law in terms of circumcision. He's talking about these cultural conflicts that are going on in the Church of Rome and really are going on throughout the entire church. Why is that important? Here's why. Normally we read Romans as some sort of argument for how you get to heaven when you die, and it's just written to all people, right? Here it is, all people, here's how you get to heaven. Here's how you're saved. Let's put it that way. Here's how you're saved. If you read Romans, you'll find out that's not what it's saying. The word heaven shows up twice in Romans, and neither of which it's saying how to get there. One is talking about how the wrath of God is revealed from heaven, right? For those, because we've all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. We can talk a lot about wrath at another time. That's a really big one, but our passage wasn't on wrath. The other one is talking about how you can't save yourself. You can't make things happen. And so Paul quotes from the Psalms and says, who will ascend to heaven, that is to bring Christ down, or who will descend to the dead, that is to bring Christ up. And that's what he's saying there in terms of you can't make this happen on your own. And he's not saying how you go to heaven, note. He's saying how you bring Christ down from heaven, because that really was the main point for them anyways. It's God dwelling with them, not them going anywhere after they die. So what's really important to note is what Paul is trying to say is not the heaven part, but a bigger point. And one that we don't always like to pay attention to, because the other heaven part, going to heaven, just is so much easier and nicer. And we split our churches over what that means and how we get there and what our messages are. And it's a very simple sort of way of communicating the Christian faith. But it is incomplete. Why? Because the most complete picture of what it means to be a Christian, to be saved, is seen in our lives and how we treat one another, how we are reconciled to one another. Mark, my friend, preached last week on this, and this week we start to see from Paul, when Paul starts talking about love, is the fulfillment of the law. It's how we love one another. That is a sign of our salvation. It's a sign. It's not the way we are saved, but it is a sign. And it's when we are deeply convicted that what Christ came to do was to break down this barrier. And for them, it was a barrier between Jew and Gentile. For us, think of all the barriers that prevent you from being reconciled to one another. Think of all the barriers that you're told are so important, you must believe them. Think about the others, those people who are your enemies, those folks. These are the people God is calling you to love because the night is over. The day is almost here, is what Romans puts. We can talk a lot about that as far as what does that mean. You know, obviously Jesus had already come. It seems like the day, Paul would say, the day is already here, right? Is he talking about the end of the world? In that sense, Paul, you're way off. You know, we can talk about that at another time because that is an important topic. But the point of this is what we leave out is that entire argument of Romans and this reconciliation to one another. And what that means in terms of the overall picture of Paul's convictions, particularly about what it means to follow Jesus, to believe in Jesus, to be saved, and as Paul puts it, to be justified, right? That's a big word in Romans, justified by faith. Okay, big thing we had to leave out because you can't just cover all of Romans all at once. The other thing we left out is how the passage starts. Really interesting. It says, "Owe nothing to anyone." And you're like, where did that come from? You might not think, where did it come from? You might just think he's making a statement. But if you read right before, this is Paul's famous conversation about honoring and respecting governing authorities from Romans 13, which is scandalous when your party's not in power. But it's something we always remind each other of when our party is in power. Hey, respect the governing authorities. What Paul does is, and I'm not going to lay out a political philosophy right now. This is dangerous. There's a lot to talk about. But as you read through what he says in Romans 13, you get to the end, and it says, pay taxes to whom it is due. That is not your decision to make, right? We don't make that decision. Now, we live in America where taxes are decided by a legislative body whom we elect, right? And we're able to talk to our Congress people and our senators and things so that they understand what we hope for in all this. Sometimes we don't know a really good big picture and we're not really realistic as well. This is not saying anything about current events right now and taxes and bills and all that kind of stuff. What I'm trying to say is when it is there, our job is to actually respect that governing authority through our taxes, through our obedience to the laws of the land. And when we find that the kingdom of God is being infringed upon in terms of how we are called to love our neighbor, right? We actually wouldn't obey the laws of the land, just like the early Christians didn't obey the laws of the land when it came to some of these things, how we love our neighbor, how we serve one another. It was one of the things that they just said, this is non-negotiable. This is what we will do. And it got them in big time trouble. It did. Note that they cared about people. They weren't thinking about policies, though. Christians were not, especially early Christians, and I think today too, not so absorbed in policies, but people and how we can serve people and how we can love people in light of all sorts of policies. And yes, we can then, if we are called to go protest certain policies or to call our senators and Congress people and our state assembly members, all of these things we can do and still respect the governing authorities. In fact, we probably are respecting them even more if we take part in that political process. This is our situation. That wasn't the early Christians. They weren't allowed to say much to their Roman senators or to the emperor or to anybody because that wouldn't have gone well. However, you do see Paul at times asserting his privilege as a Roman citizen. He does. Not for his own gain to protect himself, but so that he might go preach the gospel. This is a great storyline in Scripture about how Paul says, hey, I'm a citizen. You can't detain me. Or if you do, you better have charges. And then they release him. And why? Not because he's trying to save his own skin. No, he doesn't save his own skin. He gets beaten. He gets whipped. He gets tortured. He gets imprisoned. All of these things. And he knows this is part of his faith. But what he's trying to do is be released so that he can go and preach the gospel to all people and live the gospel and be love and serve one another. This is kind of a cool part of our Christian scriptures, where someone uses that law that is written not in order to benefit themselves. Okay? This is really important. It's really hard for us to get over that, right? That self-focused rule following or self-focused appeal to the law. Okay, there was a lot there. I hope that didn't leave you in a really weird, fuzzy place. I hope that left you in a place where at least you have some things to chew on in terms of this passage and its connection to the overall Romans passage. But here's the main point. We talk about governing authorities, we talk about respecting them, and we think that's separate from love. It isn't. Because from Romans 12, you'll see the heartbeat from Romans 12 to the end is love, love, love. He talks about respecting the governing authorities. He goes back to love. Love is part of how we respect the governing authorities. I know that sounds weird. That's not our definition. That's not how we define love. But that is exactly what it is. And how we respect our leaders. I'm not talking about me. I'm not saying you must respect me. I'm saying there are people that we are called to respect. That is how we show love. Not just to those people, but to one another, actually. Like, my job is not to show love to my mayor or governor or president. No, it's respect. I give them respect. But when I give them respect, I am actually loving my neighbor. Why? Because I am not setting up a whole bunch of rules for myself that I will only abide by if they are the way I want them to be. Why? Because my neighbor doesn't agree with me on that. And my whole desire to make my thing happen the way I want it, or even me and my friends, that's not loving my neighbor. That's loving my mind or my desires. And how does our passage end? Don't gratify the desires of the flesh. Once again, doesn't mean you can't protest, right? Your senators, congresspeople, be active. All of these things you can do, but how do you do them? Do we spread lies about people? No, we don't do that. Do we actively try to undermine certain parts of our government? No, unless it's about loving actual human beings who are in the middle of suffering. That is a Christian practice. Love. Love is the fulfillment of the law. Read Romans. See how that plays out. See how that gets lined up all the way throughout and how Paul ends his letter with love. Okay, I kind of just did the invitation for you and what that might mean. I just couldn't help myself. There was a lot of invitation there, laden in the what we left out part. So I hope you can see that and take that. So we don't need to get too much into that. The final thing is your questions. I didn't get any. No questions. Maybe because I ended the service so abruptly, the way it ended. But if you have any questions on things, feel free. I won't ever call you out. I won't say, this person has a question about this. Unless you want me to, you can text, say like, hey, here's my question. Feel free to mention my name. If you want to do that, do that. If you need to ask a question, use this number below, right here. Save it in your phone, PPC text. I have it saved as such. And anytime I need to ask a question of myself, are you buying milk from the grocery store? No, I don't do that. But if you'd like to ask a question yourself, use that number. Please, I exhort you to use that number because I think it's so helpful for me even to know how you're tracking with some of these things. If you're not at all, let me know through the text. I think that's really helpful to say, I don't get this. Could we talk more about XYZ? That is good too. I know we talk about it's the question and answer thing, but it's also just a general text line. It doesn't mean I'm going to just do it, by the way. If you text me and say, hey, I want this, it doesn't mean I'm going to just do it. You're one person among many at this point, and I want to just kind of heed the Spirit's calling in this and to be listening to people, how this is tracking, how this is serving, how this is encouraging, how we are being transformed into the likeness of Jesus Christ. Okay, that's it for today. Next week, we end Eastertide. Woohoo! And it's going to be a sermon called New Home. I look forward to going through that with you and talking more about what that means and what that looks like. I hope you can make it to church on Sunday so that we can explore that together. Even if you don't, you can always watch our services online at YouTube. Just make sure you look for the live part of the service. If you just go to YouTube and go to our channel, you'll see the live button. You can also go to our website and to our app, and there's an actual link that takes you straight to the live video feed. All right. I hope that this serves you well in your journey of faith, and that this helps your transformation as you become more and more like Jesus Christ. That's it for 3 for the Road. May God bless you and keep you. We'll see you next time.